Every subgenre has its unheralded secret classics. Some were well regarded upon their initial release, only to be forgotten in the years that followed. Still more are small-budget indies which were missed out on entirely, receiving little fanfare during their modest initial release. And it's seen all the time in the sci-fi horror subgenre. It's not helped by some big-budget flops that tarnished its reputation as a subgenre at large, even if they were recognized as a solid effort years later on. We see you, Event Horizon and Pandorum, we see you. That's why film fans need lists like this, a rundown of the underrated gems from the subgenre that brings vampires to space and hides aliens beneath your bed. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 great sci-fi horror movies no one ever talks about. Number 10, The Keep. Released in 1983, Michael Mann's strange and underrated The Keep has the impressive distinction of crossing more genres than most filmmakers attempt in an entire career. A World War II war film, supernatural horror, sci-fi thriller, adventure film, this unique and interesting 80s effort deserves a revival, particularly given the lukewarm reception it received upon its initial release. Originally a 210-minute epic, the film was trimmed to a taut, tense 96 minutes runtime by a concerned studio. The film's admittedly convoluted and heavily cut story follows a set of Nazi troops who awaken an ancient and powerful paranormal force whilst setting up camp in the titular keep, foolishly attempting to move a sacred talisman. What follows is a successful, unpredictable, dark fairy tale whose enduring influence can be seen in everything from Guillermo del Toro's critically adored Pan's Labyrinth to 2018's trashy, dumb fun Nazi zombie horror Overlord. With a score from synth-pop icons Tangerine Dream and a cast that includes the likes of Gabriel Byrne and Ian McKellen, this one is a must-see, often overlooked classic for fans of horror, sci-fi, war films, and thrillers. Number 9, Kuso. Released to critical shock and uncertainty in 2017, rap producer extraordinaire Flying Lotus's feature film debut Kuso may be the grossest, as well as one of the creepiest, sci-fi anthologies ever made. A gruesome but blackly comic anthology of odd, sickening tales, this surreal odyssey is set entirely in a post-apocalyptic LA, whose inhabitants seem like outcasts too gross even for a William S. Burroughs story. With an unsettling spoken-word wraparound between each short, this one feels more like an Adult Swim remix of the animated heavy metal than a less sci-fi influenced horror anthology like Creepshow. The film's individual segments treat viewers to sights like a smokable mutant fetus, a concrete chomping woman, and a parasite bug which lives in one unfortunate character's, rear exit. Filled with moments of bleak, dark wit and fueled by some druggy, trippy dream logic, this unique and uncompromising vision brings the horrorcore creepiness of its creator's musical output to life via a sci-fi horror story that few viewers will ever be able to forget. Number 8, Altered States. Much like Kuso, Ken Russell's insane bad trip Altered States is a film filled with imagery that most unsuspecting viewers will have trouble shaking. As a genre unbound by the constraints of reality, sci-fi seems uniquely suited to the Devil's director's command of hallucinatory images, but it took until 1980 for Russell to take full advantage of the genre's creative freedom with this unsettling, increasingly surreal tale of a scientist's doomed experimentation with psychoactive drugs and sensory deprivation. Written by network scribe Paddy Chayefsky, this one abandons the anti-establishment satire of both that 1976 success and Russell's own earlier efforts. Thin on plot, the film follows William Hurt's psychopathologist, whose attempts to unearth the root of mental illness see his consciousness flooded with strange, surreal imagery during his trips, one of which eventually leads him to devolve into the missing link and finally a moving mass of pure primordial energy. If that sounds strange, it's because it is, and this film is filled with some seriously unforgettable imagery as the director attempts to visualize ideas too scary and mind-blowing for many to even handle them in written form. Number 7, The Faculty. Okay, Kuso and Altered States are pretty intense 1-2 punch displaying sci-fi horror's potential for gruesome body horror and trippy head-free imagery, respectively. How about something a little more approachable? A great sci-fi horror date movie that won't see your potential paramour bolting for the closest doorway. Look no further than 1998's The Faculty, a Robert Rodriguez-directed teen film which saw the indie kid move into the mainstream via a gory, witty, and inventive slice of satirical sci-fi horror. As far as premises go, this one is higher than its cast of caffeine pill-snorting teens. It's Invasion of the Body Snatchers meets American Pie in this horror sci-fi mashup which brings together John Carpenter and John Hughes. The cast are universally superb, with a nebbish Elijah Wood playing the lovable nerd, Jordana Brewster excelling as the preppy heroine, Allen, and Josh Hartnett providing some all-time unflappable cool as the school's resident drug dealer and all-round bad boy Zeke. Add in some superb performances from the titular alien-infected faculty from Selma Hayek to Robert Patrick, and some impressively intense chases, and you've got an underrated 90s teen classic. Number 6. Dead and Buried. Written by Return of the Living Dead director Dan O'Bannon, 1981's Dead and Buried is the second contribution to the sci-fi horror classic pantheon from the creator. He wrote the original screenplay for Ridley Scott's 1979 smash hit Alien, the one where the alien talks. Less comedic than his later zombie horror and more of a slow burn, atmospheric effort than that space-set classic, Dead and Buried follows the story of a likeable sheriff befuddled by a string of tourist murders in his small town. Aided by the friendly local mortician, the sheriff sets about investigating these slasher-style demises, but all is not as it seems in this idyllic burg. The film's small-town mystery turns out to have a deeply creepy explanation in this underrated chiller, whose disturbing final twist pushes it firmly and unexpectedly into the sci-fi horror subgenre and leaves audiences reeling even decades later. Boasting some impressive Stan Winston special effects as well as stunning, eerie promotional artwork, this one is a classic for the 80s VHS fiends returning to sci-fi horror's glory heyday. Number 5. Body Melt. Directed by an Australian art punks group's former member Philip Brophy and written by fellow member Rod Bishop, 1993's Body Melt is a surreal and gruesome slice of body horror that makes sci-fi horror icon Larry Cohen's earlier comparable The Stuff seem anodyne. Gruesome and witty, this satirical shocker sees a weight loss pill have all manner of gruesome side effects on its unknowing victims, resulting in spectacular and horrific death scenes as the film lives up to its eponymous promise, and then some. Filled with shocking imagery of exploding genitals, deflating heads, and liquefied torsos, this insanely gruesome, gross-out classic won't be a perfect fit for more demure viewers. That said, the film's sharp script takes pointed aim at the pharmaceutical industry's uncaring attitude and the lethal lack of regulation in amoral industries like weight loss supplements, rather than blaming the small-town residents killed by their irresponsible profiteering. Unlike the otherwise comparable 1987 dud Street Trash, this anarchic film keeps its satirical ire centered on the creators of these pills rather than their unfortunate victims, making the mean-spirited bloody chaos all the more blackly comic and shocking. Number 4. Extro. Released in 1982, British sci-fi horror Extro can boast the impressive feat of being one of the weirdest video nasties. This creepy and inventive alien film brought grotesque body horror to English suburbia in its bizarre story of a returning astronaut who brings with him a monstrous alien growth, in a plot that the later flop The Astronaut's Wife essentially lifted. The film sees this British astronaut return to his wife who has moved on in the years since his disappearance and shacked up with a new bloke. And if what's left of our heroic astronaut isn't annoyed, you can bet the titular alien inhabiting his body is. What follows is a surreal, dreamlike tale of this alien-possessed father attempting to take back his son from his mother's protection via all manner of telepathy, toy-possessing, inventive slasher-style kills, and eventually outright body horror. Odder than most of the alien rip-offs of the early 80s, this one succeeds by grounding its human drama in something resembling realism, whilst making its sequences of surreal horror bizarre and impossible to follow. The result is a uniquely hallucinatory viewing experience. Number 3. Life Force. Coming from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Tobe Hooper, it would be reasonable to expect that 1985's Life Force is a terrifying and intense ordeal, but he's also Poltergeist director Tobe Hooper, meaning it wouldn't be unfair to expect a goofy, fantasy-inflected horror. In reality, this ambitious space vampire film lands somewhere between the two extremes of the director's earlier efforts, featuring some seriously impressive monster design and gruesome kills, but coming nowhere near the intensity of his iconic 1974 classic. The plot is paper-thin, following a triumvirate of humans found inside the hold of an alien spacecraft after they are taken out of suspended animation and return to human contact. With the screenplay from Dead and Buried's Dan O'Bannon, this one is pacey, twisty, and seriously scary in places, and the inventive monsters make for an interesting threat. Unfortunately, this one is a little bit derailed by an utterly bonkers ending which may or may not make sense. That said, if you're after a balls-to-the-wall surreal and scary sci-fi horror, then this cult classic is just the ticket. Number 2. The Crazies. Remade in 2010 as a surprisingly solid film to come from Sahara director Breck Eisner, The Crazies is a lesser-known George A. Romero effort which seriously needed to be given a post-9/11 update around the time. Why? Because it's one of the best anti-war satires in sci-fi horror history. Intense and satirically sharp, the Night of the Living Dead's director's original, underrated 1973 film is an apocalyptic thriller which sees a small town quarantined when a dangerous chemical agent is released and begins infecting the civilian population. Not be polite, wear a mask quarantine, more wave goodbye to civilization expression of civil liberties quarantine. A huge influence on Danny Boyle's postmodern zombie classic 28 Days Later, this is a tense and terrifying film where the military are as, if not more, dangerous as the infected. A countercultural film released during a period of intense anti-Vietnam protests, the movie follows civilian survivors as they deal with the twin threats of infected civilians and the power-mad troops, resulting in a potent and brutal piece of sci-fi horror cinema which has unfortunately retained its relevance and prescience. Number 1. The Hidden. How's this for a pitch? FBI agent Dale Cooper takes on the most dangerous serial killer he's ever crossed paths with, The Thing. Okay, so admittedly 1987's police procedural sci-fi horror master The Hidden isn't actually a crossover between John Carpenter's body horror classic and David Lynch's trippy mystery Twin Peaks, but this one does star a pre-Peaks Kyle MacLachlan as its straight-shooting police officer hero, and he is hot on the trail of an alien parasite that drives those it infects to murderous madness. This results in all manner of thrilling chases, crunchy, punchy action, and moments of intense body horror as the body-hopping monster attempts to give the boys in blue the slip. A cop thriller that marries the classic serial killer chase format with a new villain in the form of an alien parasite is an ingenious idea, and the film takes full advantage of the conceit. It's one thing to succeed as a horror, as a sci-fi film, or as a cop thriller alone, but for one underrated 80s classic to effectively straddle all three genres means this one more than earned its top spot on this list. And that's everything for this list, so thank you very much for watching along. Which of these was your favourite? Which of these creeped you out? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much, Cathal Gunning, who wrote the article upon which this is based. You can read that over on whatculture.com. I have been Sean. Make sure you follow me in the various socials at Sean Ferrick, and make sure that you're following What Culture Horror as well. Look after yourself till I see you again. Try not to bump into any alien parasites, because you never really know how it'll go. Could end up being good, actually. Do you know what? You do you. Thanks very much.